Star Wars' Kylo Ren has been voted the 7th greatest movie villain ever? Whoa. Lies! Deception! When I first heard Saul What's-His-Face utter the lines, "Save the dream," I had no idea he would be talking about Save Star Wars from Disney. Anyway, greetings Star Warriors. Welcome to the Outer Rim. Today I'm looking at an article that is entitled, Star Wars' Kylo Ren has been voted the 7th greatest movie villain ever. Now I'm really curious to see whether or not there is a group of people that this article points to that will let us all know who in fact voted on this, whether it was multiple choice or whether these people were just encouraged to jot down a list of the greatest villains in movies they've ever seen, and Kylo Ren came up the 7th most voted character in that group. I'm really curious to see if they identify anybody or any group or anything, if they even identify who was behind this poll. So let's get into it. Kylo Ren, the antagonist of the sequel trilogy of Star Wars films, has been voted as the 7th greatest movie villain ever. That is so unbelievable. I mean, just think of all the freaking movie villains you could think of that are head and shoulders, waist and kneecaps above Kylo Ren. But I'll continue. Try not to interrupt. This is a short article, it looks like. Ren caught the attention pretty quickly upon his debut in Star Wars The Force Awakens, thanks to his distinctive mask and odd-looking lightsaber. Now, I don't know if I've admitted this in any of the previous videos, but after I saw The Last Jedi, I went home, and not directly after, but this might have been some days after, but eventually I did this. I went home. In my home, I reached into my closet. I pulled out a few items that I'd owned since at least 2012 of clothing. One was a black trench coat. I had some black pants. I had a black cloak. I have a rapier with a cross guard that looks, like a cross. And I have boots. I have some fairly thick leather gloves. I think they're leather. Maybe they're not leather. I don't know what they are really. But they look like leather. So, and I have fairly long black hair. And I put all this stuff on. I have some pretty good editing skills in After Effects and in Photoshop, so I was easily able to turn my rapier into Kylo Ren's lightsaber after I had taken a few photos of myself. And this is the character that they're saying is, what was the word they used? Distinctive. Well, I guess his mask was distinctive. That's the one thing I could not mimic. I could not mimic his mask. But it just, kind of goes without saying. There's never been a Star Wars character I've ever dressed up as. Never. Because, when I was a kid, I couldn't afford it, and my parents weren't the type of people who would buy costumes for us. And as I grew up, it just, dressing up was just not something I ever did. But I could never come close to dressing up as Darth Vader, or even really Emperor Palpatine. Not Luke Skywalker, definitely not any of the characters from the prequels. I could never come close to dressing up as any of them. But these random items of clothing I had, which I had all of which I had owned, including the rapier, before Kylo Ren was ever a thought in anyone's head, I pulled out of my closet randomly. Well, maybe not randomly, but I pulled them out of my closet. I put them on, and I was Kylo Ren. As easy as that. So, but getting on, I'm getting distracted here. But the character, played by Adam Driver, has more than just aesthetics going for him. As I've just laid out for you, he has no aesthetics going for him. As Ren has proved to be one of the more formidable and complex villains in Star Wars canon. Wow. Readers of Empire magazine were asked recently to vote on who they believed were the greatest movie villains ever, and despite the fact that Kylo Ren has only been around for 2 movies since 2015. So, readers of Empire magazine. He found his way to an impressive 7th position. Who's reading Empire magazine? I mean, please, if you read Empire magazine, tell me if you saw this vote. Tell me if you voted. And you don't have to tell me who you voted for, but just tell me if Kylo Ren was even on your list. The poll launched on December 15, 2017, and the results in the latest issue of Empire, via Screen Rant, saw Ren ranking above the likes of the Xenomorph and Voldemort. Now, I'm not the hugest Harry Potter fan. I think Harry Potter is better than the Star Wars sequel, but the Xenomorph? Kylo Ren beat out the Xenomorph. How? How did he beat out the Xenomorph? Clearly, the people... I'm not going to insult them. The characters that were voted above Kylo were Darth Vader, Heath Ledger's Joker, Loki, Hans Gruber, Hannibal Lecter, and Hans Landa. I can't believe that anyone who voted for Hannibal Lecter and Hans Gruber even had Kylo Ren on their list. I just can't believe that. So I don't know how this works, how this poll works out. It just doesn't make any sense. There's like 2,000 other villains that come before this guy that anyone who would vote for those guys would vote for before this guy. Another Star Wars villain, Emperor Palpatine, made it to 15th on the list. Emperor Palpatine. 15th. Now, considering all the great villains in Hollywood history, I have no problem with Palpatine making 15th on the list. I actually think that's great. I just don't see how Kylo Ren made it to 7. Where would you rate Kylo alongside cinema's greatest villains? Let us know in the comments below. He wouldn't be rated. He wouldn't be rated. I mean, all of this brings me to an issue I've been thinking about lately. I watch a lot of, people reviewing this movie. Even still today, I watch a lot of people reviewing this movie and what they're saying. Now, most of the people that don't like it are saying much of the same thing. But recently I was watching these guys. There was about 4 of them, I think, around the table. And they weren't all Star Wars fans. But there was one guy who was absolutely crushed. And he seemed mostly crushed because of what was done to Luke Skywalker. In fact, I would say that he pays too much attention to what was done to Luke Skywalker and not enough attention to what was done to everything else in that film. But he was trying to explain to these 3 other guys around the table who aren't really Star Wars fans what was so wrong with the way they treated Luke Skywalker. And these guys just were not getting it. And he's like, well, you don't get it. And they're like, no, maybe you don't get it. My kid likes Finn and Rey and Poe every bit as much as you like Luke Skywalker and blah, blah, blah. And, this is just for a new generation and blah, blah, blah. And it became clear why you don't try to explain what is good or bad about Star Wars to people who are not Star Wars fans. I'm not going to say they hated Star Wars, but they're just very indifferent to it. And the point is, when Star Wars came out, for a lot of the guys that loved Luke Skywalker and loved Star Wars, they didn't have any other characters to look up to. This guy wanted to be Luke Skywalker, right, when he was 8 years old. And so, when he was 8 years old in 1977 or something like that, whatever year he was watching it, he didn't want to be Batman. He didn't want to be Superman. There was no one else for this guy but Luke Skywalker. Now, I defy anybody to find a kid, 8 years old, who wants to be Poe or Finn or Rey and no one else. You're going to have a hard time convincing me that there isn't a little girl out there who doesn't also want to be Wonder Woman. Or there's not some guy, some 8-year-old boy out there who doesn't also want to be Captain America or Batman. You can't compare the experience of watching Star Wars today for little kids with the experience of watching it back in 1977. I mean, who did they want to be? Zardoz? You know, I mean, who was there? There was no one. If you weren't into Batman and Superman and superheroes in general, Spider-Man and all of them, but you were into Star Wars, there was nothing else for you. With the way entertainment is today, and pop culture in general, kids are inundated with role models from fiction. They have all kinds of different heroes that they identify with. So the three people this guy was talking to and trying to convince, their kids might want to be Finn today, but they'll want to be Black Panther tomorrow. You know, I mean, as far as Star Wars movies goes, back in the 70s and 80s, you had to wait 3 years for a Star Wars movie, and then you only got 3. You know, you couldn't expect another Star Wars with Luke Skywalker in it 2 years down the line, infinitely, you know? And so, this all brings me back to this ridiculous vote. I mean, in this magazine, or this website, whatever the hell it is. Are we voting Kylo Ren 7th today and Galactus 7th tomorrow? Is that what this is, really? I mean, I don't really know what Empire Magazine is. I hadn't read this article before I started recording. So, I don't know who this audience is that's reading it. I imagine it's a Star Wars magazine, Empire Magazine. I don't know. I'll have to take a look at all that stuff after I stop recording. But yeah, Kylo Ren above the original Terminator, or even Kylo Ren above the Terminator villain in Terminator 2, or you know the Kurgan from Highlander, you know General Zod, either version of General Zod, you know. Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor. And I'm only naming, you know, characters from the late 70s and 80s. You can go way back to the early 70s, to the 60s, to the 50s, and find far better villains than Kylo Ren. Alas, this video is carried on, so I'm going to bid you all farewell. And as always, if you're listening, you are the new rebel. 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 You are the new